swinging an axe, right? They would all know what that means. It doesn't matter where you are, that axe, that piece of steel on the end of a stick is at the core of all culture. It's just a piece of steel on the end of a stick, but it's a really good piece of steel on the end of a really nice stick. And with it all is everything. Take it back to the Odyssey and Homer. Homer's Odysseus. He's traveling. He's left the wars. He wants to get home. He's stuck on the island. If stuck is the word, with the beautiful nymph Calypso. And remember, she's not a goddess, she's a nymph, so the pressure's off a little bit on, on Odysseus. But nevertheless, as nice as this is, he's in trouble. He's poked out Polyphemus's eye, and the Cyclops, that's Neptune's kid. So he's in big trouble trying to get home. But he wants to get back to his wife. He wants to get back to Penelope. And the nymph Calypso, here are the words. I should read them. What else appeared? Rosy-fingered dawn appeared. Odysseus dressed himself in tunic and cloak, and the nymph Calypso put on a long white robe, lovely and close woven. She gave him a bronze double axe with olive wood handle, well fitted to his hands. She gave him a polished adze, then she led him to the farthest part of the island where the tall trees stood, alder, poplar, and fir reaching to the sky, long, dry, and well seasoned. When she had shown him where the tall trees stood, he started cutting planks. His work went quickly, and he felled 20 trees and trimmed them with his axe. So that's in Homer. Now, what is that? Why the axe? I have a theory. I'll save it for the very end, and when we hit the theory of why the axe is so important, we'll carry on with that. So I'm going to take you on a tour of axe poetry. It's connected to a comic book that I used to love when I was a kid at summer camp. I would steal David Boggs's copies of Atomic Knights comic books. Nobody's heard of Atomic Knights, I don't think. You know Atomic Knights? All right, this is in the 60s, Atomic Knights. After there was a whole lot of post-Armageddon, post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear wasteland comic books where, in this case, Atomic Knights the Earth was rendered uninhabitable by radiation after the horrible wars. Humanity had been forced to live underground in caves, and only emerging to the surface, they would find certain death among the radiation. But scientists, a group of scientists, discovered that ancient suits of armor from their museum possessed mysterious qualities that protected the wearer from the deadly radiation on the surface. And thus, the scientists, dressed in their medieval armor, were able to venture forth on the surface and fight resurgent evil. So it's great, Atomic Knights. This is cool. But this is the oldest story going, isn't it? Redemption by the ancient, the ancestral totem, right? The old armor protects you. Luke, here is your... Luke, I'm giving this to you, Luke. What is it, he asks. It's your father's lightsaber. Not so crude as a blaster, but a more civilized weapon for a more civilized time. Bum, bum. So the same thing, the ancestral totem that redeems us. So I followed this through, and it's a theme that carries through everything. There's some early English poetry, but I'm going to get to the American start on this, where people start. There's an English poem called The Debate of the Carpenter's Tools from the 1500s. And it's a drunken bit of doggerel. It's really awful, but it at least shows it was written by a woodworker, because this is a broadaxe. And when the broadaxe speaks, this is what he says. The broadaxe spoke without miss. He said, "The plain my brother is. We two shall cleanse on every side to help our master in his pride, and earn him more silver in a year than he and any man may bear. So the broadaxe says, my brother is the plane. Does this look like a plane? But it is. You know, a plane for smoothing wood, you know, when you smooth wood with a plane. The broadaxe is a finishing tool, but it looks like a battle axe. But it's used only to shear off that last 1/16 of an inch of wood down the side of the wood to make a smooth, perfectly hewn timber. So that at least the fellow knew what it was. Well, that's English poetry. We finally get to America. It doesn't start so well. Because some of you may have known Walt Whitman. You may know the poem, the Song of the Broadaxe from Leaves of Grass. You don't. Nobody does. But anyway, unless you're into this stuff, you'd say, oh, look, Song of the Broadaxe. I'll read that. You go, oh, man. Oh, man. All right. But it's great. It's wonderful. And I'll give you a little bit of Song of the Broadaxe. But that was 1860s. 1850s, there is a poem that was published in Graham's American Monthly Magazine of Literature, Art, and Fashion. Now, you ever seen any of these antebellum magazines that have, stories, the magnificent watermelons of Switzerland, and, these magazine stories and poetry. And then there's the latest fashions from Paris in black and white. And it looks like, 80 pounds of clothing on this woman. Nevertheless, the fashion at the end. So there's a popular magazine. Well, this fellow named Alfred B. Street wrote a poem called The Song of the Axe. And at this time, 1850, he's one of what are called fireside poets. So this is for popular reading and entertainment. But I will read it the best I can, give you a sample of it. It is quite long. I have cut it down immensely. It is the Song of the Axe. And of course, what are the axe? There's two parts, the head, the bit, the iron, and then the helve, the wood, the hickory. And both parts have their play, because together they make the axe. The Song of the Axe by Alfred B. Street, 1850. I was born deep down in the sable depths of the mine. Thus commenced the iron, where I lay in dull and sullen sleep, till the miner, gaunt, naked, and strong, with his sharp pickaxe, and by the light of his flaring torch of flary and smoky crimson, then lit up the gloom like a star, forced me from my dull and sullen sleep, and whistling like the keen northwest o'er a peak of the Ural Mountains, O mountains, stern mountains of snow, lifted me dull and sullen, and as I was, to the dazzling eye of the sun god. I hated the miner, that miner, gaunt, naked, and strong. With his flaring and crimson torch, his sharp pickaxe, I hated him, and I wished I was a weapon to bite into his heart. Ho, 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 how I would have laughed as I bit into his heart. That miner, gaunt, naked, and strong. The iron is then forged into an ingot in a foundry. I have left that, but now he's gone on to, well, there's further adventures. This is page 3 now we're on to. But I was not destined to bite into the heart of that miner, gaunt, naked, and strong. And I was then hurried to the smithy, where stood at the stalwart blacksmith leaning on his sledge, that blacksmith with his leathern apron and his arm that would fell a buffalo. And he smiled, that blacksmith, when he placed me in his forge and wakened his monstrous bellows. And I knew that my foe, the red fire, would leap into my entrails, melt my heart. And I tried to yell out my wrath, but could not. And so I lay dark, sullen, yes, dark and sullen, as when I slept down in the sable mine, until I felt my foe, the red fire, again melting my heart, again softening my strong, well-knit muscles into a mass of living flame. And then the sharp anvil, swank, 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 rang the blows of that stalwart blacksmith, and a smutty-faced lad he called Son. Son! Oh, how I wished I had his throat in my strong and well-knit muscles. I would have torn the wild bull torn him apart as the wild bull tears the throat of the deer. But as for the stalwart blacksmith, I was afraid of him, so I lay and let him smite me. And then I felt him myself beaten into a shape, the welcome shape of the axe, and I laughed, for the axe was made for slaughter. And then I was taken from the burly blacksmiths, and keen, clear, flashing teeth of steel were given me, and I laughed again, for I thought if I had a chance, how I would bite into the heart of that miner, gaunt, naked, and strong. Okay. Oh no, it's carrying on, but you're getting a sense of what the poetry level, this is like Vogon level poetry. I don't know if you know Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The Vogon poetry is the third worst in the universe. This was probably, you see why it's 1850s and you're getting this to read at home. All right. But who's the other character that hasn't entered in yet? We've had the axe head. The handle. Oh, and the handle. I was born in the pleasant wood, thus commenced the helve, not rough and fierce and hateful like the iron, but modest and mild. I was born in the pleasant wood. I was an arm of the sturdy oak, and I bore a wreath of green leaves in the long, bright summer days, where the sunlight loved to sparkle and the raindrops loved to hum. And I bent a green roof o'er the nest of the merry bird. Oh, I was happy. I danced in the liquid wind, and it murmured my joy at times in the golden dawn and sunny noontide. I don't know how much you can take of this, but it goes on, and it's so bizarre because one of the most, and I'm making fun of it, but this was light entertainment for the time. For 1850s, this was probably just fine. This was Three's Company on TV. You know what I mean? So it's just low, kind of popular entertainment. Nevertheless, they get married together, the helve, and there's a wedding ceremony where the helve meets and they get sold, and they travel west. They have lots of adventures, and then finally it ends. My song is done, and the blended tones of the axe sunk away like the last water-like notes of the lute of the wind, sunk away, away, and soon deliciously away. And I treasured it in the inner chamber of my ear and sung it to myself in the deepest nook of my heart, and then gave it to the world. And what I've left out is about 18 more references to that miner, gaunt, naked, and strong. All right. So that's a rough start to American poetry. Transcendentalism makes a big thing. When people start getting out of their heads and looking beyond, it comes out of Quakerism is a big start of this. It comes out of English Romanticism. So you're going to see parallels in the art world. Of course, one of the most famous people with an axe, in fact, let me see if I can do the start. Near the end of March, 1845, who is it? Near the end of March, 1845, I borrowed an axe. I'm going to keep at it. Near the end of March, 1845, I borrowed an axe and went down to the woods by Walden Pond. Yeah, Henry David Thoreau. It's among the transcendentalist writers. Not a poet, but poetry indeed. He says, for the woods by Walden Pond, nearest where I intended to build my house, and began to cut down some tall, arrowy white pines still in their youth. It is difficult to begin without borrowing, but perhaps it is the most generous course to permit your fellow man to have an interest in your enterprise. The owner of the axe, as he released its hold on it, said that it was the apple of his eye, but I returned it sharper than I received it. All right, so I don't know if Henry David Thoreau borrows an axe and goes down to build his house. He later writes, he says, the axe head was loose. It came loose, but I made a wedge of green hickory, drove it back in this borrowed axe. So he's building his house down to the. He's going up to the Emerson's house and mooching supper off Mrs. Emerson every day. And so he's not quite living self-reliantly, but nevertheless, he says he dips the head of the axe, because it was loose, in Walden Pond to swell the wood. so they make it tight. You know what happens when you do that to an axe head? It gets really tight because the wood swells up with the water, right? But what happens is it's trapped in that iron, in that steel head. And so that expanding wood is, the fibers, the structure is crushed. And when it dries out even smaller. So it's made, the problem is made worse. It is a bad thing to do to a borrowed axe in particular. So there he is down there. There's Thoreau saying, I'm going to, oh, gosh, sorry, Mrs. Emerson. So Thoreau's a bit of a terror. Nevertheless, at the same time, again, transcendentalist coming out of the Quaker and this new ways of thinking is Walt Whitman. And you think of the times they're in. We're in tough times now. These guys had, Millard Fillmore was the president in the 1850s. And the Fugitive Slave Act. This is a very, very difficult time. Country's headed for war. So things are rough. And they're very serious times for people, Thoreau and Walt Whitman. And Whitman writes, of course, The Leaves of Grass. Now, you know what happened. It was condemned as, he got the same reaction to his poetry as Robert Mapplethorpe did to his photography. You know what I mean? It was pretty shocking to everybody. But the modern, he really was the birth of the modern in poetry. So pointillism, this kind of slideshow effect, and very serious as that last one was silly, but it's still called the Song of the Broadaxe, just 10 years later. And I will just give you a selection of it, just to give you a sense of it. It is way too long to read here. But nevertheless, this is Walt Whitman's Song of the Broadaxe. Weapon, shapely, naked, wan, head from the mother's bowels drawn, wooded flesh and metal bone, limb only one, lip only one, gray-blue leaf by red heat grown, held produced from a little seed sown, resting the grass amid and upon, to be leaned and to lean on. The house builder at work in cities or anywhere, the preparatory joining, squaring, sawing, mortising, the hoist up of beams, the push of them into their places, laying them regular, setting the studs by their tenons in the mortises, according as they were prepared. The sack of an old city in its time, the bursting in of mercenaries and bigots, tumultuously and disorderly, roar, flames, blood, drunkenness, madness, the hell of war, the cruelties of creeds, the list of all executive deeds and words, just or unjust. It's this pointillism, these putting, you just bam, 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 image after image. Where the city stands is with the brawniest breed of orators and bards, where no mountains, monuments exist to heroes, but in the common words and deeds, where the slave ceases and the master of slaves ceases, where the populace rise at once against the never-ending audacity of elected persons, where outside authority enters always after the precedence of inside authority, where children are taught to be laws to themselves and to depend upon themselves, where women walk in public processions in the streets the same as men, where they enter the public assembly and take places the same as men, where the city of the faithfulest friends stands. See the Quaker progressivism he's got? Just, this freaked everybody out. This is 1860. America, I do not vaunt my love for you. I have what I have. The axe leaps. And he takes the axe from where it was in Europe, chopping off heads and a violent weapon of sacking. He says, in America, it builds a world of brotherhood. America, I do not vaunt my love for you. I have what I have. The axe leaps. The solid forest gives forth fluid utterances. They tumble forth, they rise and form. The shapes arise, the shapes measured, sawed, jack joined, stained. The coffin shape for the dead to rest within its shroud. The shape got out in posts, the bedstead posts and the posts of the bride's bed, the shape of the little trough, the shape of the rockers beneath, and the shape of the baby's cradle, the shape of the floor planks for the dancer's feet, the shape of the planks of the family home, the home of the parents and children. Her shape arises. She is less guarded than ever, yet more guarded than ever. The gross and soiled she moves among do not make her gross and soiled. She is silent. She is possessed of herself. They do not offend her. She receives them as the laws of nature receive them. She is strong. She too is a law of nature. There is no law stronger than she. The main shapes arise, shapes of democracy, total result of centuries, shapes of friends and home givers of the whole earth, shapes bracing the earth, shapes braced with the whole earth. That freaking people out in 1860. That's hard now to deal with. But that was Walt Whitman. That pointillism, just those tiny little images to build up. Now, all right, so you all have heard of Whitman. Everybody, Whitman, if we pass it, he got a little more easy to read in his later years. There's someone I want to introduce you to, Elaine Goodale. And she was in a movie, an HBO movie, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, of all things. She portrays, she's played by Anna Paquin. Elaine Goodale, never heard of her. I had not myself until I started looking at this. She's from Massachusetts, graduated Smith College. She published her first book at 12 years old, she and her sister. She graduated from Smith, set up the first native school for American Indians, taught at Hampton Institute in Virginia when it had an Indian school as part of it. She then went out to the Sioux Reservation and ran the school there and said instead of sending children away to school, they should stay with the family. For heaven's sakes, don't send them off and make them into something, some crazy thing. So Elaine Goodale writes this poem. She's 20 years old. She's still a student at Smith College in Massachusetts. And it was sent to me, and I thought it was one of these really rich things, but it's pretty good. This is the wood chopper to his axe. And it's kind of, this is, let's see, 1883. And I think if we had to have a an art on the wall paint equivalent, to be like Klimt or Aubrey Beardsley. Was the sexual energy in this poem is pretty intense. And not to be laughed at all. It's great. So this is the wood chopper to his axe by the young Elaine Goodale in 1883. My comrade keen, my lawless friend, when will your savage temper mend? I wield you, powerless to resist. I feel your weight bend back my wrist, straighten the corded arm, caress the hardened palm. War on these forest tribes they made, the men who forged your sapphire blade. Its very substance thus renewed, tenacious of the ancient feud. In crowding ranks uprose your ambushed, waiting foes. This helve, wrought out and planned by long use suited to the hand, was carved with patient, toilsome art from stubborn hickory's milk-white heart. Its satin gloss makes plain the fineness of its grain. When deeply sunk, an entering wedge, the live wood tastes your shining edge. When strongly cleft from side to side, you feel its shrinking heart divide. List not the shuddering sigh of that dead agony. Your gaping mouth, yon gaping mouth you need not miss, but close it with a poignant kiss. Nor dread to search with whetted knife the naked mystery of life, and count on shining rings, the ever-widening springs. Hew trenchant steel, the ivory core, one mellow, resonant stroke the more. Loudly the cracking sinews start, unwilling members wrenched apart. Dear axe, your accomplice I, in love and cruelty. Whew. All right. It's an interesting person. Again, it was named Elaine Goodale. Elaine Goodale. Elaine Goodale. A woman poet. All right. I'm going to say, I have one, Robert Frost, wonderful poem, more like Andrew Wyeth. You know, Robert Frost. Again, if we had to have something on that, I'll give you that one here. Can you handle one more Robert Frost? Okay, I'm coming close to the end here. So Robert Frost, everybody knows Robert Frost, right? So there's the American poet. He was the poet laureate of country, and of course, but grew up, born in San Francisco. Was big in England for a long time before he went to New England, became a failed farmer and poet. So you think of him as, an old New Englander, Robert Frost, mending wall, the road less taken, all that stuff. Born in San Francisco. Was big in the English work. Nevertheless, again, the development of the American poetry, very American, as they called him. This is the axe helve. So, of course, the handle, this is the helve, H-E-L-V-E. And this is a poem called The Axe Helve, The Axe Handle, by Robert Frost. It was in the Atlantic magazine in September 1917. It's a story. I've known ere now an interfering branch catch my axe, my lifted axe behind me, but that was in the woods to hold my hand from striking at an alder's roots. And that was, as I say, an alder branch. This was a man, Baptiste, who stole one day behind me on the snow in my own yard where I was working at the chopping block and cutting nothing not cut down already. He caught my axe expertly on the rise when all my strength put forth was in his favor, held in a moment where it was to calm me, and then took it from me, and I let him take it. I didn't know him well enough to know what it was all about. There might be something he had in mind to say to a bad neighbor. He might have preferred to say to him, disarmed. But all he had to tell me in French English was what he thought of not me, but my axe. Me only as I took my axe to heart. It was the bad axe helve someone had sold me. Made on machine, he said, plowing the grain with a thick thumbnail to show how it ran across the handle's long-drawn serpentine like two strokes across a dollar sign. You give her one good crack and she'll snap right off. Then where's your axe head now? Flying through the air. Admitted, and yet what was it to him? Come on my house. I put you in one that lasts a while. Good hickory, one that's growed crooked. The second growth, I cut myself. Tough. Something to sell? That wasn't how it sounded. Then when you say you come, it costs you nothing. Tonight, as well as any night, beyond an overwarmth of kitchen stove, my welcome differed from no other welcome. Baptiste knew best why I was where I was. So long as he would leave enough unsaid, I shouldn't mind his being overjoyed, if overjoyed he was, at having got me where I must judge if what he knew about an axe that not everybody else knew was to count for nothing in the measure of a neighbor. Hard if, though cast away for life with Yankees, a Frenchman couldn't get his human rating. Needlessly soon, he had his axe helves out, a quiver full of them to choose from, since he wished me to have the best he had or had to spare, not for me to ask which. When what he took had beauties, he had to point me out at length to ensure they're not being wasted on me. He liked to have it slender as a whipstock, free from the least knot, equal to the strain of bending like a sword across the knee. He showed me that the lines of a good helve were native to the grain before the knife expressed them, and its curves were no false curves put in from without. And there its strength lay for the hard work. He chafed its long white body from end to end with his rough hand shut round it. He tried it at the eye hole in the axe head. He mused, "Don't need much taking down." Baptiste knew how to make a short job long for the love of it, and yet not waste time either. You know what we talked about was knowledge. Baptiste, on his defense about the children he kept from school, or did his best to keep whatever school and children, and our doubts of laid-on education had to do with the curves of his axe helves and his having used these unscrupulously to bring me to see for once the inside of his house. Was I desired in friendship? Partly as one to leave it to, whether he had the right to hold such doubts of education? Should this depend upon the education of those who held them? But now he brushed the shavings from his knee and stood the axe on its horse's hoof, erect, but not without waves, as when the snake stood up for evil in the garden. Top heavy, with a heaviness his short, thick hand made light of. Steel blue chin, drawn down and in a little. A French touch in that. Baptiste drew back and squinted at it, pleased. See how she's cocked her head. All right. So I'm going to finally end up with, Updike wrote a few more. I'm going to end with one more. Gary Snyder. Does that ring a bell to anybody? He's one of the beat poets. Well, snap our fingers to this. Gary Snyder. So it moved into the 20th century. This is 1983, so now Zen Buddhism is coming in. And other influences from the West Coast. But Gary Snyder is one of the deep imagery poets. First, the environmental, ecologically conscious poets. And his final poem, I read to you on the axes then, is, again, Axe Handles by Gary Snyder, 1983. And it does kind of tie us all up to the end here. So Gary Snyder, Axe Handles. One afternoon, the last week in April, showing Kai how to throw a hatchet, one half turn and it sticks in a stump, he recalls the hatchet head without a handle in the shop and gets it, wants it for his own. A broken off axe handle behind the door is long enough for a hatchet, and we cut it to length, take it with the hatchet head and the working hatchet to the wood block, and there I began to shape the old handle with the hatchet. And the phrase first learned from Ezra Pound rings in my ears. When making an axe handle, the pattern is not far off. And I say this to Kai. Look, we'll shape the handle by checking the handle of the axe we cut with, and he sees. And I hear it again. It's in Lu Ji's Wen Fu, 4th century AD essay on literature, in the preface. In making the handle of an axe by cutting wood with an axe, the model is indeed near at hand. My teacher, Xijing Chen, translated that and taught it years ago. And I see. Pound was an axe. Chen was an axe. I am an axe. And my son, a handle, soon to be shaping again, model and tool. Craft of culture. How we go on. Yeah, great to end on. So that concludes our cultural efforts for the morning. We can go out now and cut down a tree in the front yard. As Odysseus did with the axe given to him by the beautiful nymph Calypso. And what was the axe to do for him? It's what I believe so much about all of these things. With the axe, again, was these tools. What do? I think they take us home. He took the axe. He was able to work the wood to build the ship to take him home, the home that he built with the axe. This is how we build our nest, and that's why it'll always be with us. So, thank you. I have axes. If you'll look under your seat, I have axes for everyone here. And I will conclude. Thank you all for coming out today. I sure appreciate it, and for letting me. It has always been my dream to read poetry in a Chautauqua setting in a great southern city. So I thank you all, indeed.